All right, good morning, everybody. Today is Tuesday, the 4th of April. And as mentioned in here, we're going to go over Chapter 9 today. But before we do that, we're going to go over two of the problems for Chapter 8, one of the lab problems, and one of the homework problems. All right, then we'll go over Chapter 9. We'll do something similar tomorrow in that we will go over two of the Chapter 9 problems, one for lab, probably one for the homework. And then we'll go over chapter 10. And Thursday we'll see how it goes. And what I mean is if we finish early, we might both do some problems for chapter 10 and some problems for chapter 11 on Thursday, just because we don't meet on Friday and just because of the fact that that would get us to that point. All right, where we would have gone over everything for 8, 9, 10, and 11. You don't have any work due this weekend at all, but you will have a week from Sunday. You'll have 8, 9, 10, and 11 due. And what I'm looking at right now is probably giving you a lab day on Monday when we get back, which is, I don't know what that is, like the 10th. Then the 11th, give you some kind of a pretest. All right, and then we would take the test probably on Wednesday. All right. And Thursday, we'd be going over into the next section. It'll be something like that. We'll see as we get going in here. All right. Okay. So with all that said, then let me jump in and think these are the ones that are not done. So for chapter 8, let me see if these are the ones I finished or the ones I didn't finish. Yeah. So these aren't done. So what we're going to do first is we're going to do the expand collapse one. So let's see if we can find that on here. So that is in the extra exercises, develop and expand collapse application. I'm not going to read it to you, but the idea is less button, some more button, text will be added. So it's going to be some hide and basically some stuff where you're going to be hiding and then showing some stuff. All right. So it says to open this, run the application. See the first paragraph is displayed for each topic that along with a link that allows you to display additional text, but the links don't currently work. All right. Next, it says review the HTML. So let's do that. All right. And if we take a look at it, let's take a look at what's new, so to speak. All right. We've got an H1 at the top. We've got an H2. All right. But notice in here that on here on this div that we have right here, it has a class of hide. All right. And that's kind of important right now. All right. And also notice in here, we've got an anchor that says show more. It's not going anywhere. All right. Then a little later, we've got another div with a class that's equal to hide. All right. And then finally, now towards the bottom, we've got yet another div with a class of hide. All right. And under these classes of hide, the next thing you've got is a show more here, and you've got to show more here, and you've got to show more down here. All right. Also, just notice that we have, again, we're bringing in the slim version of jQuery. This is not the newest, but it's okay for what they're doing. It's 3.4.1, and as we learned yesterday, the newest is in 3.4.6. All right. And our source file will be called subset expansion.js. So this is what we have now. Just because I like doing it this way, and I should have done it before yesterday, and I didn't, sorry. But I'm going to make a JS folder here, and I'm going to throw that file in there. And I'm also going to come in and make a CSS file, or folder, I should say. And I'm going to bring that in there as well. And as long as we're at it, let me do this quickly for the, that's fine. That's fine for what we're doing right now. All right, so let me open this thing up, and I'll open it up with code. And the first thing, of course, that I'd want to do right away is to change these paths because, of course, they're wrong. So this is CSS slash, and down here, this is going to be JS slash. All right. So you can see that that is down there. Now it looked like maybe I screwed up. So let's see. All right. I put my CSS file in here also where I wanted it to go there. So let's do this. All right. So now it should be okay. All right. So if I do come in here right now and run this, my guess is not much is going to happen because there's nothing in this file. But as you saw before, when we attempted to come in here and run this, we get this. So there's that show more, which is right now totally non-operational. All right. So we're going to go in and we're going to put in the code for this. One thing that most of the time, one thing that people start to realize when they look at this stuff is quite often when you're doing operations like this, there aren't very many lines of code that you use. What do I mean? We're going to write this whole thing and it's going to be 15 lines of code. All right, which at least in my home. So now we can do is we can come in here just to make sure everything's working. And I can come in here and I can put in, again, we can just use the $sign, but I'm going to do it the way that that they've been doing it in Murach, and that is to use the document.ready like this. All right. Now, just to check and make sure it's working, I'm going to put an alert in here that just says hello. All right. And then I'm going to come back to my index.html file and open it with live server. Now it says hello. Now that you might think, well, that was kind of a waste. It actually wasn't. And the reason that that was not a waste is I showed that after I moved everything over, that my pathing is okay. Plus I've shown that this is being called. All right. Okay. So let's take a look one more time here. And I want to look at everything that's in here. All right. Now this ID for the whole main that's in here is called JDOM. I don't know if that's for JavaScript Document Object Model. That would be my guess. All right. But one thing that we want to do is basically when we click on something in here, we do want it to show and hide, but we don't want else to happen. Remember, when you click on something by default, typically it's going to want to go someplace. We want to show or hide something, but we don't want it to go anywhere. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here. I'm going to get rid of this. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, well, this is going to be, again, inside of this JDOM. And what should make sense to all of you is what we're playing with in there or what we're working with in there are the A tags. All right. It's that show more. Those are all A tags. But remember, when you go right here, go back here, and we look at these tags, the href is here. By default, it wants to go someplace when you click the tag. We're telling it to go nowhere. All right. So the first thing I want to do in here is basically I'm going to want to come in here and I'm going to want to prevent the default operation from happening. So I want to come in here and say .click, and I'm going to pass in that event object. EVT, you can call it E, you can call it event if you want. You see it called a lot of different things. All right. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say the first thing I want to do is a prevent default. And all that means, so right now, if I save this and I go back here and I run it, right, nothing has happened. but right now, it's not trying to go anywhere when I click these. All right. And you can say, well, it wasn't before either. And that's true, but we've now got some JavaScript in there. All right. So what we need to do is we need to let the system know, basically what we just clicked on. So in other words, what link did we just click on? So the way you do that, and we can call this anything we want, but we might as well call it link and set that equal to EVT dot current target. So in other words, what that is that is link we just clicked. All right. And what we'll want to do is basically we'll want to toggle the height class that's in there. All right. I want to say that again. We want to toggle that height class that's in there. What does that mean? That means that if something is hidden, we're going to want to show it. And if something is shown, we're going to want to hide it. There's a little more that we have to do than that. But for now, I'm going to do this. Just like that. Now, that may or may not make any sense. So again, let me save this and let's go back and take a look at it. So every place in here where we've got an href like this, all right, you'll notice that before it, we've got a paragraph, and that paragraph is inside of a div, and that div has got a class of hide. So we see it here, we see it here, all right, and we see it here, all right? So we've got all those. Now, if I save this and run it, I'm not going to because nothing is, well, I can, but nothing is still going to happen. We haven't told it to happen yet. All right. So you say, well, something did. Yeah, it did, but it's not actually correct right now. All right. And we're going to fix that in just a second. All right. It actually looks now pretty much like it's working. Okay. Because it is showing and it is hiding. All right. Now, so you might say, well, then aren't we done? Well, notice if we click here, okay, we've got that, but this still says show more. What we want this to do is when this is shown here and here and here. So right now it is working in that it is showing us more. But like I said, we want that thing that says show more, we want it to say show less. All right. And that's not really very hard. In fact, we're going to be using something that we've been using for quite a while in here, and that is just a basic if statement. So I'm going to say if all right. So if it's not equal to hide, that means we're already showing it. All right. All right. Because if it's not equal to hide. Okay. So what we want to do then, right? Believe it or not, that's everything. All right. I put some blank lines in there, but like I said, it's about 15 lines. Let's see if it works. Then we'll come back and as the saying goes, we'll kind of dissect it a little bit. So now notice it says show less. So does that one. And so does that one. Now, the reason that I chose this one, there's actually a couple reasons I chose the ones that I did. This first one in here is actually something that you could potentially do inside of a web page. All right. You probably have seen that kind of thing before, where you might get a paragraph in here, and then there might be, like a show more or a ... or whatever. So this is one way that you can do that. All right. So this might be a summary, and this might be like it says show more or whatever. And you could use this for a lot of different things, at least potentially you could. All right. And the other one that we're going to do in a minute is going to be the one for the future value. And that one, the reason I chose that one is I think at least it does a good job of kind of a compare and contrast to writing something in vanilla JavaScript as opposed to writing something, as opposed to writing something using JavaScript and jQuery. So again, everything is within here. You learned that yesterday. All right, so that starts there and it ends there. And as I mentioned, the whole thing is 17 lines. All right, this was our main. So if we click in here any place, we want to prevent the default action from taking place. And again, typically that default action will be in here, because really the only thing that we're setting it up for, the only thing that we're writing code for, is to be able to handle clicking on those links. All right. So this, again, when you say current target, and this is in your book, hopefully I went over it, but if I didn't, you'll have to go back and take a look at it on chapter 8. But that, in that case, that's the link that we just clicked. So it becomes the current target. All right. And we're telling it, as it says here, to toggle the class that says hide. The other way we could have done this is we could have done this and done an if on here and said if it equals hide, all right, then basically set it equal to not hide, all right, or we could have a show class. There's a lot of ways that this could potentially be done. In fact, one of the things they said in the chapter yesterday, and I believe they even repeat it in today's lecture, is that sometimes when you really start to learn this stuff, some of the problems that people run into is there's a good half dozen or a dozen or more ways of doing the same thing. And I've always been a big proponent of do it the way that makes the most sense to you. All right. So again, in here, we're saying that if this is not equal to hide, what that means is, okay, the text is showing. All right. Not equal to hide means the text is showing. Since it's showing, we don't want that link text to say show more anymore. We want it to say show less. All right. And if that paragraph is not showing, then the hyperlink should say show more. And again, we've got our choice. We could make it say something else, but since it said show more to begin with, that seems to make a lot of sense. And since less is basically the opposite of more, all right, that kind of makes sense. So Grant, sorry, because I know you're the only one here, but does what we're saying in here, at least conceptually, does this make sense?
Yeah, I think so. That if statement was pretty confusing to me, but I think it's a bit more clear now with the attribute, like the not equal hide.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think I get it a bit more now.
All right, good. Okay, then let's take a look at the second one. So let me do a file save in here, and I'm going to close this. All right, and we're going to bring up the next one. I'm not going to do that image gallery. I'm going to let you guys do that one. But let's see, we had. So where do I have it? I'll grab it. Just give me a second here. All right, so it's the future value one here. Just gonna put it right here. All right. And let's take a look at it right now. I don't think it does anything. So if we do come in here. Oh, okay. Let's see. I don't think that was the one that was finished, but let's take a look at what's in here right now. Again, it's not that this is a terribly long. All right, this is not that this is a terribly long program in here. Oh, this is written the old way. Okay, so when we look in here, this is the way we had been doing it, and it works. Here's the const. So there is where we're doing it basically, and we're using our alias. Here we're adding our event listener. All right, so this is the way we had been doing it before. So we're telling it again when we click the calculate button, call calculate click, which is right here. All right, so let's do this. All right, I'm going to bring this up. So let me go back one, and let me bring this up in code. All right, and the first thing, again, I didn't do it, but I'm going to right now, is I'm going to come in here and make a CSS folder, and I'm going to go and drag that file into my CSS folder. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to make a JS folder, and I'm going to drag my future value JS into there. All right, so that looks good, and that looks good. Then coming in here, again, I have to come in and say CSS / future value. And down here, all right, I have to put in JS / this. Now, in the example that they have here, in the example, we do not even have, when you look in here, we don't even have jQuery in here. All right. I'm not sure if there's going to be anything else that we have to do in here other than add jQuery, but let's do that right now. All right. And again, you found this out yesterday that there's plenty of ways to do this. I'm just going to go out like we did yesterday, and I'm going to go out to cdnjs.com, and I'm going to type in here jQuery. And there it is, the jQuery library. All right, and I'm going to click the middle one here, which says copy script tag. So that is now in my clipboard. All right, and I'm going to put that was still open from yesterday. All right, right there. And again, you saw yesterday how long that is. If it's easier for you to understand, you can break this up like I'm doing here. Now, one thing you cannot do in JavaScript is by default, you cannot come in and like I couldn't sit there if this was at the end of the line, I couldn't put the no on one line, then the refer on the next line. Technically you can, but you've got to use backslashes and stuff. It's not even worth talking about. The point is, what we just did was we brought jQuery in, and you can see it's 3.6.4, so it is the newest one. All right. Now, do we need anything else in here? I don't believe so, but we'll find out in a couple minutes. All right. You. All right. We're going to work with that for a while. Now, what I'm going to do, it's not that we have to do this, but what I am going to do is I'm going to grab everything that's in here, right there, like that, and I'm going to comment all of it out. Again, that way, by doing it that way, I've got the old one in there. So I've got it both the old way and the new way. All right. And there might be something in here that I'll be able to use. I mean, we're still doing if statements, etc. So rather than just throwing that out, I'm going to keep it in there in case I do need it. So just like before, we're going to start this with a document dot ready. All right, so there's our start. Well, let's see. I think we can use at least some of this stuff, but we're going to have to change it around a little bit. Okay. And they are using the semicolons in here, so I'll put them in as well. All right. So do we want the investment? Yes. Oops. Do we want the years and the annual rate? Yes, but we want to use them. Right now, this isn't going to make any sense to the system. So instead of saying dot value, remember, this is on the right-hand side of the equal sign. So we're going to say dot val like that, just like that. And we're going to put it in here. All right. Yeah, it's putting in an extra paren every time. And we're going to put it in here. All right. So that's the first thing that we're doing. So again, you can kind of see when we're mapping these up, they look similar to one another. So again, what we're doing in here is not terribly different. All right. But instead of using the dot value, which we were using with vanilla JavaScript, we are now rather using the dot val. These are all gray because we're not using them in any code down below it yet. All right. So let's take a look, and first of all, let's see what we've got down here. Okay. We said if the investment is not a number or it's less than 0, we want to do an alert. And you know what? Else if with the annual rate, else with the years, and we can actually use all this stuff. Why? Because we're working with variables here. We're working with that variable and that variable and that variable, which we have set based on values that are in jQuery. So I think we can grab all of this. I'm not going to go down to the final else yet. I want to look at that in just a moment. But I'm going to come in here and put that in right here. All right. Notice we have no errors. So again, if the investment that we just figured out, because it's what was in that one text box, if it's not a number or it's negative, all right, then we want an alert to come up that says investment must be a valid number greater than 0. Then the same thing for the annual rate and the same thing for the years. All right. So, I mean, as far as I can tell, that looks pretty good. Now, you should also be able to realize by now that if I get down to here, it all worked. All right. So again, if it was that, you do this. Otherwise, if it was that, you do this. Otherwise, if it was that, you do this. Otherwise, so it's not that I have to say this, but we inputted a valid investment, annual rate, and years. And again, that should make sense to everyone. All right. So what did they do in here? They put in a let future value equal investment. I think that'll be okay. Then there's a for loop. I think that'll be okay. Then they're figuring this out, and I think that'll be okay. And then we're doing this. This line will have to change because that's written in vanilla JavaScript. So let's grab all of this. All right, I'm going to come back up here. What did I grab? I grabbed everything. In fact, we'll even grab their comment. All right, and I'm going to put that all the way down to here like this. Oops. All right, well, something's goofy there, but we'll fix it in a second. There, I think that was it. All right, so what's got to change here? Well, remember that when we use jQuery like this, and that value is on the left-hand side of the equal sign, when it's on the left-hand side, we don't need an equal sign in there, and we use val. So what we want to do basically is this. So the syntax is a little bit different in there, but it's the same thing they showed in the book. We could do it just like this and leave the other part out. The problem with doing it like that is rather than giving us dollars and cents, which is what we're going to get with the to-fix 2, we might have a whole boatload of places after the decimal point. All right. There's really only 2 things more that we want to do. When we get done with this, first, we want to come in and we want to set our focus back to the investment, because that's the first field. And then finally, we also want to do that. Let's see. I want to make sure I'm not skipping anything here. That may be enough. I'm looking right here to see why I did it twice previously. All right. In the calculate. Oh, we're missing something here. That's the problem. This isn't going to work right now. Why? Because we never told it to do anything when we click the calculate button. I want to say this again. I wrote this too vanilla JavaScript-ish. So right now, I don't think it's going to give us any errors, but I don't think it's going to work. So let's see. All right, investment must be a valid number greater than 0. Yeah, we already got that. That's fine. So click, and nothing happens. Why? Because we didn't associate anything with that button. All right, because in my quest to get this done, all right, I skipped that line. So let's put it in. That's got to come way up here. In fact, way up here. And really everything that we're doing is inside of that button. All right, everything that we're doing here should be in that button. So let me put that in, and I'm going to do this. Very similar to the kind of thing we did before. The button was called calculate. Dot click. Right? Now I screwed up. Those 2 things right there, they've got to go down to the very bottom here. Like that. And everything else that's in here should be tabbed over 1. Like that. Now, let me run it and see if it works, and then we'll come back and look at everything that's in there. So now with nothing, okay, I do get that. Again, we could come in here and add right there a red asterisk and use the number greater than 0. All right, and it put the focus there. Well, that's good. How about here? We'll put in 1000. Right? Annual rate must be greater than 0. All right, looks like the focus should be here, but we can fix that in a moment. All right, so we'll put that to 3.5. We do it again. And it says years must be a valid number and greater than 0. Okay, how about 10? And then we calculate, and we've got an answer. All right, there's a couple things I'd like to change. That is, when this is wrong, I'd like to put the focus there. When this is wrong, I'd like to put the focus there. All right, I've always been of the mindset that try to make life as easy as possible for whomever is running the program. All right, so let me grab this. It's already doing it here, but I'm going to do it there anyway. That is, I'm going to come in here and investment.focus, and that this is the rate. We want that to be rate.focus. And for the last one, all right, if this was bad, we want this to be year.focus. Now I'm hoping I didn't make any errors, but let's try it and see. So if this is bad, there we still have investment must be a number greater than 0, and there's our cursor. So 1,000. All right. Annual rate must be greater than 0. It's not putting the cursor there. I'll have to check that on that to see why it's not. All right, because it's putting the focus here, even though we told it to go here. All right. And again, if we put a value in there, again, we're getting this. And again, it's going back there. That might be something that I'm missing. I don't know what it is. But everything is working. So let's go back and take a look. So in here, the only thing that we had to add in our index file was we brought in right there, we brought in jQuery. All right. And then this file was empty. All right. So we came in here, and hopefully what you noticed is there was a lot more in common with what we did, because you can see in here both the vanilla JavaScript version and the non-vanilla JavaScript version, because I commented the other one out and just put it at the bottom. All right, so just like we did previously, the stuff that's in here basically is all the same, other than, so what did we change? Well, we didn't put an event listener in anymore. All right, the old-fashioned vanilla JavaScript way, and we didn't have the DOM content loaded. Basically, the DOM content loaded was replaced with this. The event listener was replaced with this. All right. And again, what we're saying in here is what? All right. The investment, again, is equal to the value that's in that text box that's referred to as investment. All right, so it's the one with an ID of investment. The second one has an ID of rate, and the last one has an ID of years. That's probably my problem here. So this should be rate right there. All right, and this should be years right here. Okay, we'll look at and run it again in just a moment. But again, we want to put comments in here. All right. Put values in text boxes into local variables. And why are these local variables? Because they're defined inside of if we do go and define something out here. So if I would have defined those 3 variables out here, not only would they have worked, but if we had called other routines, then we wouldn't have to pass the variables into other routines. We only have one routine. There's just our calculate click. So it works fine the way it is. All right. So this would be what? Validate investment. All right. And again, we come in here just like we did down below. If it's non-numeric or it's less than or equal to 0, it isn't going to work. Then we come in here with this second else, and we're validating the annual interest rate. All right, and we're doing the same kind of thing that we just did. And then finally, we're coming in here and we're validating the number of years. So what we changed in here, as opposed to what was done previously, is we changed these 3 lines from value to val. All right, of course, we added this as opposed to our DOM content loaded, and we used this as opposed to our add event listener. Then coming down to here, nothing in here changed. So the guts, so to speak, where we're doing all of our validation, none of that changed. Then in here, the only thing that we had to change was right here. All right, because previously, again, we used value. But logic is logic. All right, there's a couple things that I say, and one of them is it doesn't matter what programming language you're using. We could have written this program in C#, and other than syntactically, it would have been the same program. All right. The other thing I always say is, when he's like, this doesn't work and I don't know why. The answer is always in the code. All right. You meant to do something and you didn't do it. You didn't mean to do something and you did do it. All right. And I'm that's just me speaking from years of doing this. All right. So this is going to make sure that it sets it after we get going. And this is the initial one right here. So let me go one more time. Try to run it one more time. And again, if I lay off here, there's my message and there's my focus. We do it now. There's my message. Still didn't change where the focus is. I'm not sure why. I would have thought it would have jumped there, but it didn't. Okay. All right, so it is working. And when you think about it, now what they're saying here is if you're investing $1,000 at 3% over 23 years, let's try 25 here. It's pretty sad. So it's about 24 years. Nope. It's between 23 and 24 years before your money doubles. All right. And that's what they're saying. Now, that's an annual interest rate. There's all sorts of other things. What this, all right, with this particular example was trying to show, all right, was just how similar, all right, just how similar it is to write something in vanilla JavaScript as opposed to writing it in jQuery. All right. So before we go on, any questions on this one, Grant?
No, I think that's pretty straightforward.
Okay, good. All right. So let me just show you quickly, and we'll go over it again before we finish today. But for chapter 9, there's modify an image swap application. We've done these before, but what this does, and you can kind of see it here, is if I'm right here on this one, the first one, and then I click on this one, it's going to fade in. All right. You can kind of tell how the fade is happening here. So that's one of the ones for chapter 9. The other one was modifying this carousel to use animation. I just didn't like the way this one works. So the one we're going to do tomorrow together is this one. All right. The image swap one. And then the one that we'll do for the short exercises tomorrow. So this is the one we just did. And you will do the rollover yourselves. All right. So this is adding special effects to an image gallery. There's nothing wrong with this one, but all they're saying on a link, you're changing. That's the way that it would be run. All right. This one here, all right, it says debug a slideshow application. It says it has a bug in it. Instead of displaying the slides in sequence, it displays every other slide. Your task is to debug this. So we're going to look at that one. So we will look at tomorrow then the debug a slideshow app. All right. So with that said, let's jump into, I'll go till 9, so 10 minutes, and then we'll take a break. All right, so I am on page 279, chapter 9, how to use effects and animation. And the author even mentions in here that basically anything that you work with anything that you work with that is conceivably changing what's on the screen. In other words, you bring up a web page, boom. Now something changes on it, something like we just did. We actually just did animation in the example with our show more and show less, because we brought something into view or removed something from view. All right. And it says many developers like these jQuery methods because they're fun to develop and they add interest to a page. Now, this is the last sentence in this first paragraph. It says, remember the primary goal of a website is usability. All right. So just because you put some real cool graphics or some real cool animation into your website, you might make it worse and not make it better. And when I say worse, you might make it more difficult for people to understand exactly what it is you're trying to do. Finally, they say here, as you read the chapter, you might find it difficult to understand how some of these methods work until you see them in action. So again, they have included the examples in the chapter in the downloaded source code. All right. So we will look at least. So, all right, we should be done, I would guess, by 10 o'clock or no later than that today. All right. Tomorrow is, to me, tomorrow and Thursday. It's not that these aren't important. I'm not a big I'm not a big fan myself of using animation just because I've seen it used too many times in ways that it did not have to be used on websites. That said, you know, I mean, if I'm creating a website that's going to, be for kids, or I'm creating a website that's going to be, a game or whatever, I might want to use a lot of animation in it. I just in my um travels through this stuff, I haven't done a lot of that. All right, so we're going to talk first, as it says, how to use effects. Then we'll jump into a slideshow application with effects. And then they get into using animation. And technically, the whole chapter is animation. Using effects is animation. All right, having a slideshow with effects where things can fade in and out or whatever, that's animation. But then we'll talk more about animation. And what you'll notice is with most things that you do with animation, all right, you're almost always going to have to pass in a value. And that value typically, if it's just one value, that value will be a number in milliseconds. And that's how long you want the animation to last, or how long before the animation runs, or whatever. Finally, the chapter ends with about 4 pages where they go through a carousel app with animation. And the last thing I want to say about that, and I think I've even said this before, and that is you can build a carousel and you can build it with vanilla JavaScript. You can build a carousel and you can build it with jQuery. You can build a carousel and you can build it with Bootstrap. You can build a carousel that's done just with CSS and HTML. So again, there are a lot of ways to do it. Sometimes the reason that people choose to use jQuery as opposed to building a carousel app with just CSS or even with Bootstrap or with vanilla JavaScript is that word animation. All right. So this is one time you might want something to fade into view. You might want your slides or whatever you're animating to fade in and out of view, etc. So that's what they're going to get into in here. All right. Okay. So as it says, the chapter begins by presenting the basic methods for effects. All right, some of these have already been shown to you, just so you know. It says in practice, any illusion of movement on a web page can be referred to animation. And I said that before. And again, just to repeat it, what that is saying is we've already been doing animation since chapter 8. All right. And even tomorrow and Thursday. Now we haven't done anything with forms with jQuery yet, but some of the stuff we'll look at on Thursday with the jQuery UI, you'll go, we kind of did something like that already. Yes, we have. All right. In fact, one of the things that they will discuss in here towards the end of this chapter is something that's referred to as easing, E-A-S-I-N-G. And that's how something works when it fades in, fades out, etc. When we get to that point, I'm going to show you something else in the jQuery UI that deals with easing also. All right, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So as it mentions there, figure 9.1, some the jQuery methods for effects. So there's a summary. All right. And you notice we've already dealt with a couple of these. And those are, we dealt with hide and we dealt with toggle. All right. And as we didn't have a show in there, but we could have in the example we just did. All right. So some of these should make sense. All right. Notice with show, it says display the selected elements from the upper left to the lower right. So by default, if my screen, just imagine that what you see in white here, imagine that's my screen. Then right here in the upper left-hand corner, that is our point of origin. That is 0, 0 right there. All right. It's not in the middle of the screen like when we were back in 8th grade when you learned how to graph things. No. All right. So hide, toggle, and all toggle, as I said before, is like a light switch. So notice there's a slide down and a slide up. There's also a slide toggle. And what does that mean? That means if your slide previously was down, do a slide up. If your slide previously was slide up, do a slide down. So many of the things that you work with in here are going to have a toggle associated with them. And sometimes using the toggle, in fact, typically, it'll result in less code. All right. And a lot of times what you'll see in here when you start doing this stuff is, if you remember, we talked about that question mark colon operator. All right. And a lot of times what the people will use the fade toggle with that, because it'll result, like I said, rather than an if statement with 3 or 4 lines of code, it'll result in just a single line of code. All right. So notice it says for all of the methods except fade2, the primary parameter is the duration. So again, that's the number of milliseconds you want for something to happen. All right. Now the fade2, as it says, not only requires the duration, but an opacity. So in other words, when something fades in, do you want it to fade in and be immediately visible? Or do you want it to fade in where the opacity is less, so it's kind of flushed out in the background, and then it gets brighter? And there is no right answer. It's what you want. Or if you're creating something for someone, what they want. All right. So as it says, the examples in the figure show how this works. The first one does a fade out on a heading over 5 seconds. So what is that? Okay, that is right here. So this startup message should fade out, but it should take 5 seconds. Now, I want to mention this and talk a little bit in here about the callback in just a second, but not right now. So that's what this is telling it to do. All right. Then we've got another one. Same message. We're telling it to fade out over 5 seconds. And as it's fading out, or after it fades out, then slide back down. All right. So this is chaining that we're doing. It does the first thing, takes what's left, and then does the last thing. All right. So there's many different ways to do this. So this is a fade2. So as they said, it has to use opacity in there. So it's starting basically at 200ths, which means it's almost invisible, and it goes to 1, where it's totally opaque. All right. Now, 2 more things. The first is, I'm not going to do them in order, that when you're putting these in here, okay, you can put any number in there you want. Now, if you want something to happen like that, you could put 1,000 in there. You could even put, for example, in here, 500. Now, if you did that, it's going to happen over half a second. And you have to realize that with most people, they're not even going to realize anything happened. It's one of the reasons they're showing these things and they're allotting 5,000 milliseconds so you can really tell what's happening. The other is that in most, not all, rather than putting a number in there, you can put in the word slow or the word fast. All right. And if you put in the word slow, by default, it's going to take, all right, slow is going to take 600 milliseconds or 0.6 of a second. Fast is going to take 200 milliseconds or 0.2 seconds. And the default will be 400 milliseconds or 0.4 seconds. Again, when I don't know about you, but you can't blink your eye. It's not physically possible for you to blink your eye that fast. So again, when you are talking about doing all of this stuff, when you're doing true animation, that's when you're chaining a bunch of stuff together. That's when this slow and fast might really come into play. All right. The other thing I want to say, and this is probably the most important thing for those of you that next semester or during the summer semester, again, during the summer, Evan and I talked about it, and he asked me, he said, what would you rather teach this summer? And I said, to be honest with you, I'd rather teach the C# class because I had just taught it. He asked me this at the beginning of this semester. And I said, I've got all my notes and everything else. And I said, but if you want, I'll teach the AWD, what is it, 1111, the database-driven web development one. I told you it's Murach. And he said, I wouldn't mind teaching that one. I said, okay. So there's actually going to be 3 classes that are going to be offered this summer. All right, one is a seated only, and that'll be AWD1000, this class. And Doug Gegelman, the new instructor at St. Louis, will be teaching that in St. Louis. I'll be teaching the AWD 1100 or the C# class at this same time, except I shouldn't say that. I think that they're going to change it to like 8:30 to 2, and it's going to be Monday through Thursday. We won't meet on Fridays. And Evan will be teaching the AWD 1111 class, and I believe the same time. We had talked about 8:30 to 2, Monday through Thursday. All right. That's at least what I've been told. Okay. So there's a bunch of examples in here, but I want to mention one in particular. And that kind of like I went off track, but it's this one here. And it's what's called a callback function. The reason I'm mentioning this now is those of you who will take the AWD 1111 class with Evan in fall, you will be doing much, much, much work with callback functions. In fact, when you get into this where you're working with Node.js, which is JavaScript on the server, more than anything else, it's going to be using callback functions. All right, so let's talk about what they are. In the example right here, this is a callback function. So what it's saying is run this. All right, once you've run that and it's completed, then run this. And it may not sound that important, but again, I don't want to get into it right now because you might find it too confusing. All right. But the way that JavaScript typically runs is it more or less is what's known as single threaded. So it just keeps trying to go through and do whatever it is it's supposed to do. Sometimes you don't want something to happen until something else has happened. So in other words, this right here, this callback is not called until that successfully completes. So you're taking some control over this. And again, the reason that that's important is imagine I was calling other stuff underneath here. All right. If you didn't put a callback in, it might be possible that I might have more code down here that depends on this. All right. And it'll start running before this is finished. And that just has to do with the inherent nature in which JavaScript works. So as they say in that second bullet right there, the callback parameter is for a function that is called after the effect has finished. All right. And then finally, again, they mentioned in here that chaining is commonly used with this. I already mentioned that. So before we go and run into this, it's 9:05. Let's take 10 minutes and let's please come back at 9:15 and we'll pick it up, and we should finish at o'clock today, I would think. So I'll see you in 10 minutes.